Coming up, a 5% tax on alcohol to help the homeless and fight addiction. How will Anchorage voters decide?
It just doesn't seem fair to continue to go after one industry that's already very heavily taxed.
If you want change, you need to support it.
The city says the tax would raise money to house the homeless, get them into treatment, and clear out camps like these.
I am for it. I'm 100% for it.
No matter how much help you extend out to them, they don't want it.
Ahead, why some neighborhoods are on the fence as they consider the true cost of whether to tax or not to tax.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to our program. Well, soon it may cost you more to buy a bottle of wine in Anchorage or a beer at your favorite watering hole. In the upcoming municipal election, voters will be asked to approve a 5% retail tax on alcohol. The purpose, to raise about $13 million to fight homelessness and addiction. So how will this affect your pocketbook? You'd probably pay about 40 cents more for a six-pack of beer, 50 cents for a mixed drink, for a $35 bottle of wine, $1.75, $2 for a $50 bottle of liquor. But before we begin, some disclosure here. I turn to families on my own street as a sounding board about the tax, since we have long lived parallel lives next to our neighbors in the woods behind our homes. The measure had mixed reaction, one sign of a big battle ahead. Some of the tax would come out of the wallets of customers at places like Darwin's Theory.
We're fighting it big time because the public doesn't want it.
Many wonder if the money raised would truly help to ease the city's homeless crisis.
So, no, it's all ridiculous, because I don't see where any of the taxes are going to go to saving the people.
But with frustrations high over crime and the blight of homeless camps, the hospitality industry believes the tax stands a good chance of passing.
Our industry wants to be supportive of the community.
Sarah Oates says Alaska Char sees the need to do more to help the homeless, but says it's unfair to target one industry.
A lot of the crime that we've been hearing about in the last 2 years that's just blown up all over the city has been directly related to opioids. And yet there is no proposal to tax the opioid industry at all.
After marijuana was legalized, the city levied a 5% retail sales tax on the drug. Supporters of the alcohol tax say it's only fair that alcohol be treated the same.
But the marijuana industry doesn't pay taxes at the federal level, whereas alcohol industry pays pretty high taxes federally and at the state level. So it just doesn't seem fair to continue to go after one industry that's already very heavily taxed.
Some people might feel that Char is looking out for its own members' interests.
Well, sure, of course Char is looking out for our members' interests. Right now it's a struggling economy. I think it'll not only hurt small businesses and consumers who just want to go out and enjoy a beer after work, but I think it's also going to have negative impacts on the community as a whole.
Char points to Seattle and its out-of-control homeless problem and says, let it be a warning to Anchorage.
We've looked at studies from Seattle, which has a very similar model to what the mayor's proposing, and homelessness and substance abuse has gone up in Seattle. They spend $1 billion in tax money a year on homelessness, and it's only gotten worse.
The tax could be a tough sell, even in neighborhoods that now coexist with camps. Neighborhoods like mine in Midtown. And this area down here is referred to by the neighborhood as the Hole.
And just this morning, as I was driving up Gamble Street towards work, there was a huge 250-foot tall black smoke cloud from a fire burning right in the middle of the hole here.
Christopher Constant is one of the assembly members who has pushed hard for the tax. He believes the city is at a critical crossroads, and without more money to respond to homelessness, the tent cities will only grow. I smell the smoke.
Yeah, no, it was really gross. This could be it right here.
There have been a number of fires in these woods, and my neighbors worry they could spark a wildfire that could spread to our homes.
First off, there are people that were living here, and that's just a tragedy. Second off, the people that were living here are now displaced. Who knows where they're at?
Constant says the tax would provide more money to clear out these camps and make the trails safer.
Well, the cost of not doing anything is that things will stay the same, and it's not okay.
I did one side fence over here so that people wouldn't crawl over.
Tom Morrison lives down the street from me. We've been neighbors for about 20 years. He's had campers move in right behind his fence.
We live in an area that is convenient to everything in town. I mean, we are in a prime location. Well, it makes it a prime location for them too.
Morrison says he's tried to offer the campers help.
No matter how much help you extend out to them, they don't want it. This is where they want to be.
Morrison says he'll be a no vote for the tax.
You could throw $100 million at this.
My heart rate definitely goes up when I'm walking through this section.
Some who use the trails feel the tax is worth a try.
I am for it. I'm 100% for it.
Others are on the fence.
My heart goes out to them if this is the only way they can survive.
Peggy Bergstrom says she's crossed paths with a lot of campers who are mentally ill.
So that is a terrible place for them to be if they have a mental illness.
Bergstrom is inclined to vote yes, but is still not convinced the city will spend the money where it's really needed and wants more specifics. So, not to pick on my own neighborhood, but given its closeness to the problem, it's surprising there's no clear consensus about whether to tax or not to tax. With the governor's plan to cut more than $1 billion in state spending, supporters of the tax say that it comes at a good time. The language on the ballot says the money could only be used for things like alcohol and drug treatment, mental health services, housing for the homeless, as well as campsite cleanups. Up next, life after homelessness.
Most people want a hand up and they have their dignity.
Most people require assistance. It takes a lot to walk away, to quit.
Why Hank Wentz and Rose Hubbard support the alcohol tax, why they think it'll make a difference. But first, some of our viewers weigh in on the tax debate. Voting in the Anchorage municipal election begins next week. And if you haven't registered to vote yet, you're out of luck. The deadline has passed. Now, this is a mail-in ballot election, and the ballot packages go out on March 12th. We recently met with two people who are campaigning for the tax. They say they know from firsthand experience that the money could make a big difference.
I've literally had nowhere to stay and nobody to call.
A small apartment, but a window into a huge achievement. Rose Hubbard says every night used to be what she called the hunt, a hunt for a place to stay.
There's times when you have exhausted every effort and the best you can hope for is an emergency room. And at least it's warm and they're required to feed you.
Today, life is good for Rose and her husband, who cleans carpets for a living, a job that pays for this 2-bedroom apartment. Rose also wants to give back. Her dream to open up a legal campsite for the homeless. She works at it every day. Rose also has another passion project.
I kind of keep a running tally.
She collects donations of feminine hygiene products to distribute at shelters once a month.
I had a time when I couldn't even afford pads or tampons for my cycle, and it was really embarrassing.
Rose has a new mission: to convince Anchorage voters to pass an alcohol tax.
Can I get a laptop?
Sure. The same for Hank Wentz. He works out of the Luzak Library every day.
I have to own my own sobriety. I have to be able to be accountable.
Although Hank is no longer homeless, he still can't afford a computer and internet service, which he needs to post motivational messages on his Facebook page he calls Natives for Sobriety.
This is the Elders' Meditation for the day, March 4th. I post this to help other people. Grandfather, help me to stay centered today.
Hank also uses his page to push for passage of the alcohol tax.
I enjoy helping people.
Hank and Rose serve on an advisory council for the Anchorage Coalition for Ending Homelessness. Both believe they wouldn't be where they are today if they hadn't received help with housing.
It's hard to think about the rest of your life or anything else in your life when you don't know where you're going to sleep that night.
We found a spot in the library to visit. Rose brought BB, her therapy dog, who helps her cope with old traumas. So what was the turning point for you?
I got tired of losing everything. I was walking the streets. I was selling my body.
Anything and everything she could do to stay high on drugs. Both Rose and Hank have been homeless off and on since they were teenagers.
I became homeless when I was 13.
Both have tried to commit suicide.
In the alcoholic environment, you have a lot of abuse, a lot of suffering, and a lot of trauma, and a lot of shame.
If you have nowhere to go, nobody that gives a damn, you start feeling like you are nobody. And that really takes a toll on people.
Hank says he drank about 3 liters a day, but mainly used alcohol to fall asleep.
It would help me get comfortable sleeping on those roots. When I was a nomadic homeless native, I like that word, I would wait until 10 o'clock at night because all the places for me to stay warm would be closing, and then I would hit the liquor store.
At the height of your addiction, how much did you use in the way of city services?
Well, are we counting when I was in prison and using the hospital as an emergency center and sleep off? Nudge from the judge, going to court all the time. And that's just being homeless.
Out of all the services you've received, what has helped you the very most?
Being able to have that mental health there so I'm not suicidal or homicidal, and being able to have an apartment.
About 4 years ago, both Hank and Rose got into subsidized housing. Rose and her husband no longer need it, but Hank still needs the help. So what's your drinking now?
Maybe about once every 2 months.
Hank introduced me to one of his counselors who confirmed he's come a long way since his days on the street, that when they first met, he drank almost every day.
I spent the first year in that apartment literally drunk every day after work, washing dishes.
But Hank says the stability of permanent housing has helped him plug into programs that have helped him reinvent himself. Rose has also weaned herself off drugs. Housing, she says, was the key.
It takes a lot to walk away, to quit, even attempt to leave drugs behind. Your body has to go through excruciating pain, sickness, and most people can't handle that on their own.
Rose says if you live in a homeless camp like this one, it's harder to get help. She says most programs are full, but if a spot opens up, you'll probably not be sober enough to take advantage of the opportunity.
You can't show up to any of the places high as a kite. And most people, when they want out, is when they are at their highest point, because they realize if they take one more, that's probably going to be their last one. And so it's insanely complicated to get into any services.
Rose believes the alcohol tax will make more detox and treatment services available.
That would cut down a lot on the amount of deaths.
If we saved like 100 people a year from being out there in the cold, that's 1,000 people in 10 years. If you spent $50 on a bottle of wine, you would pay $2.50, and you won't even miss that, because anybody that can afford a $50 bottle of wine doesn't need to worry about $2.50. Then you wonder what to do with the homeless anxiety.
Hank's addiction to alcohol is gradually being replaced with another, his passion for poetry.
You label me with severe anxiety, depression, PTSD. The lifelong cycle by society is not capable of hearing me.
The Anchorage Press recently published one of his poems, a poem that asked people to listen to those who suffer on the streets.
You don't hear me. Go ahead and throw money. You don't hear me. You have all the answers, you see, but you still don't hear me.
But Hank and Rose hope voters will hear them now as they campaign for the tax, which they believe could help others find their way home. Up next, they say that the devil is always in the details. The city's homeless housing coordinator joins us next to answer some of the big questions that voters may have. But first, some comments from some of you. When it comes to homelessness, there are no easy answers, no way to really know the true cost of homelessness, not to the city budget, nor to the people that we see on the street corners, the folks that we try not to make eye contact with. But it is Nancy Burke's job to help the community understand the challenges and find solutions. She's Anchorage's homeless housing coordinator. You know, I know that you do a lot of number crunching, trying to do a census on the homeless populations, but do you ever get out to these camps? And if you do, what do you see?
I do. In fact, I started in the work of doing outreach in camps in 1988 in this community, and have been connected in one way or another through my positions to the work of attaching social services to people so that they can be successful in housing in the community. And I would make one correction. My title is actually Housing and Homeless Services Coordinator, very intentionally, because housing is the solution to the problems that we're having here.
And that's a good point. Well, let's talk about some of the services that if this tax passes, that it would fund, because a lot of people are very skeptical. You know, they say that they worry that they'll be frittered away in a bureaucracy, and that they actually won't go to the people to do what's promised. So how can you guarantee us that that won't happen?
It happens all the time at the municipality, and people are also thinking about a prior time when there was a tax at the state level, and the state, by constitution, is not allowed to dedicate funds to something and to bind future allocations. The municipality is able to do that, and in fact, if you look at the Denina Center, that's a great example of how a specific tax to fuel one particular part of the community's needs has been a success. So the tax that's collected on hotel beds, 12% is collected, and it's allocated to the Denina Center rebuild, the building of that building and paying off those construction costs. A third of it goes to promote tourism, and then a third to the general fund.
Yeah, but a lot of people have wish lists and dream projects and things like that. So how are you going to stay on top of that and not have mission drift, so to speak?
There's two specific things in the community that have been worked on. The first is that the Assembly has really engaged in this issue, has created a committee that meets monthly and reviews issues around homelessness and sets priorities for their allocation. The second is that the neighbors and businesses and community members asked to be a part of the process of saying what their priorities were. And so the Anchored Home Plan is a joint process really held up and sponsored by the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness, but joined by the mayor and the business sector, our funders in the community in supporting it.
All well and good, but the people who oppose this tax point to Seattle, and they fear another Seattle scenario.
It's a perfect, for one thing, we're not Seattle. If you look at our homeless numbers are actually trending downward. If you look at 2016 to 2018, in 2016 we had about 900 adults who were in shelters or on the street, and in last year's count it was down just above 800. So the kind of homelessness that is of concern to people, we've built a system that really addresses the needs and moves people from the camp locations or streets to housing and stability.
Well, Rose Hubbard, the woman we talked with earlier in the program, she wants to see a legal homeless camp, and I know that sort of goes against the Housing First model. Is there room for something like this, and might it make a difference as well?
There's room for a lot of strategies. We need a whole continuum of strategies. In this alcohol tax, we're focusing on access to treatment services, housing stability, and the ultimate long-term solutions. We need emergency, today's solutions to make sure people are safe. But the focus of this work and the work that's been done from the mayor's office is really on ultimately those solutions that are going to make Anchorage a better place to help people stabilize in the community.
So I guess one of the things that Rose mentioned is the requirement that you have to be sober to get into these programs. Is there going to be something to fix that problem, that catch-22?
The Housing First approach really is dealing with that person's core needs, the housing on that day. And it does not have a requirement that a person becomes sober, because this is what we've learned. High barriers like being sober, being able to track your money, those are things that people lose track of, or their skills are not at that level when they're homeless. They're dealing with sobriety, or they're dealing with their survival.
They go to the camp and they run into people who will get them intoxicated again.
Absolutely.
So they can't pass any kind of a screening to get in. So finally, if this tax doesn't pass, we have just a little bit of time, what do we do?
We've built some systems that will address the needs. I think if we listen to some of the neighbors that you saw, that you visited, and the community, the timeline and the appetite for this work to move more quickly is there. And we would just have to continue at the pace we're at. If we look at last summer, we really saw that we did about twice as many camp abatements as we had done the summer before. That's not bad, but it's not the pace that the community wants, particularly those areas that are impacted most.
All right, well, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us, Nancy Burt. And finally, as we leave you some photos taken by Nathaniel Wilder, an Anchorage photographer whose pictures say more than 1,000 words, but also what cannot be said. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.